Welcome everyone to Metadata Makes the Difference. My name is John Horodyski. I'm the Managing Director at Salt Flats, and I will be giving this presentation. I'll also be the chair for track 2. So for those of you who want to stay along, I'll be here with you for the next few hours. Let's go through a quick agenda of what it's going to be today. I'm going to do some quick introductions of myself, then going to go into some sort of concepts into what is metadata. We're then going to talk about language and meaning, and then the importance of governance. And then we will open it up to Q&A. I will have the Q&A session open on my second screen. I'll be able to take your questions there. All right, let's begin. My name is John Horodyski, so I'm the Managing Director of the Insights and Analytics practice at Salt Flats. I have been doing digital asset management, metadata, taxonomy for over 20 years now. In the practice that I have, we do work in information management, whether that's working with digital asset management, MarTech, metadata and taxonomy design, or anything around data strategy. I've been doing this, as I say, for over 20 years now. We had the privilege to work with Fortune 10, 50, 100, and 500 clients from multiple of industries, consumer packaged goods, media entertainment, pharmaceutical, as well as insurance and other industries. I'm also an adjunct faculty at San Jose State University in California, where I teach a graduate course in digital asset management, and I've been doing that for about 15 years now. And in addition to regular public speaking, obviously been a member of the Henry Stewart events team for many years. I also write a monthly column for CMS Wire. I have a book published a few years ago, and I have a new book coming out in September, published by Taylor and Francis, all about metadata. So before we get going, for those who know me, I'd like to share a really fun metadata t-shirt. So for today's presentation, I will be tracking the Q&A going on. And for those who asked really good questions, I'll be sending off, if you can send your information afterwards, I will be able to send you off a metadata t-shirt. All right, let's begin. So what is metadata? You can probably see this interesting photo there. So why is metadata so important? Well, with this image that you see in front of you, it can feel like sometimes, we feel lost, or, because we don't have a metadata model, or even worse, because we don't have a metadata strategy. So you may feel lost with all the unstructured data that's happening around you. And let's be very clear about something that's going on. Content is everywhere, and not only that, but content is going to be coming more and more. We're not going to produce less content, we're only going to produce more. So that is more videos, more images, more everything. So the question that I pose to you today is, how are you setting up your content to work for you? Well, the answer is metadata. So quite simply, metadata is data about data. It's 3 things as described by NISO, and it's a definition I've carried along with me for over 20 years. It's descriptive, it's structural, and it's administrative. So at its first level, the descriptive section, it serves all those things for discovery. So it's all the things that we use, such as title, subject, creator date, all the things that you would be looking for in a search. Now, the second category is called structural or technical. Now that includes things like the file format, the file dimension, the file sizes, all that great technical information that follows an asset through its technical life cycle. And that's important information for people in your organization, and that's a good metadata to have. And the last one is known as administrative metadata. And you usually see that around 2 major themes, one being rights management, where you can track licensing and metadata around rights for your assets. And the second one being preservation metadata. And that could be if some of the assets you have in your collection, you want to keep in perpetuity. So you want to make sure that you're able to track maybe a physical asset as well as a digital, but have information for historical purposes going forward. So that's kind of what metadata is, but some people think it's a little scary, something not very well understood, kind of like the metrics, a lot of green lines, a little bit sort of misunderstood. When in fact, metadata can be something as effective as a really good looking model like this. It's a good spreadsheet. You have fields and values, and fields in this context is the attribute that's going to be applied to the piece of data with additional information attached to it. And those are going to be the values. So again, this is a real, just sort of a simplistic idea of what a metadata model can be for you, but this is the best way to start managing the content you have and to understanding the attributes and field values for your content. So what does it look like in real life? Well, here's an image of my dog, Lola the Puggle. So there's descriptive metadata. We know it's a photo. It's for the Puggle campaign. Talent is Lola, and it was taken by Tracy Fall. But it's a JPEG. It's also 7.7 megabytes, and it was created from 2020. And for the administrative metadata, looking at sort of the rights management of it, we know it was associated with a project called 365, and there is limited usage rights for this photo going forward because we want to protect Lola's image going forward. And a lot of people always ask, well, where do we start with all this metadata? The model looks good, but where else can we begin? Well, I always like to direct people back to what I refer to as minimum viable metadata. And the best place to start for this is something known as the Dublin Core, created by librarians many years ago in Dublin, Ohio. And they produced a core set of fields that you could help manage and track what they called electronic information. So when I work with clients and people are starting to say, where's a good place to start? I always like to point them back to this because it's a great place to say, here's how you can start a really good metadata journey. So for those of you who are on the presentation today and listening for the first time, thinking about your metadata journey, the Dublin Core is a great place to start that journey. So now let's take a little bit of a different approach with metadata and take it a step away and say, well, metadata is all about words, and those words are part of language, and each part of those words and language has meaning associated with it. So what I want to do in this section is sort of explain a little bit more about language and meaning. Now, we do know that language is always in a state of change. And in fact, according to the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, over 1,000 neologisms, and it is an interesting word itself, those are new words and phrases, they're added to the English language annually. And these things come from new words being invented. One of the most interesting ones over the last year being COVID. It's a brand new word. And sometimes it is new meanings for existing words, such as a drone. A drone used to mean something very different, but now most people associate a drone with a remote aerial vehicle. Same word, two different meanings. Language is always changing. And language happens quickly, and it's a global thing as well. It's not just specific context. So, and it does take time to permeate into daily awareness through reading, through newspapers, through other types of media. But it's important for you, for all those working in digital asset management and in metadata, to understand how to keep up on all these changes that are happening. Look at some of the new words that were just added in this last year. There's many words, and they get published every year in December. You can always see what has been added to the OED. I chose 3 for this occasion, 3 interesting ones. Adorkable, it really is a word. Unfashionable or socially awkward in a way regarded as appealing. So you could actually say as somewhat of a compliment, they may be adorkable. Adulting, another noun that was added to the language. The action, a process of becoming, being, or behaving as an adult. Those are good things to aspire to, I suppose. So adulting has now come into our language. And lastly, zhuzh, and that's how you pronounce it, is a zhuzh. It's all about stylish and glamorous appearance. You can use it as a verb. You know, they zhuzhed up before they went out to the opera that night. So it's interesting to see all these words being added to the language, but metadata is never done because language is always in a state of change. So if anyone ever asks you, hey, when is that metadata project finished? It's not finished because it's not going to be finished because language will change, your products will change, and your services will change. And metadata will change with it the whole way through. So metadata is not a project, it's a program. It keeps on going. And that's a great thing to have. So let's take another context and say, remember, the old adage of a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what does it matter if we can't actually find what we're looking for because of those words? So if you look at the image on the screen, I being in Vancouver, Canada, I would say that's a cookie. However, my colleagues in the UK would say, well, actually that's a biscuit. Well, those in France would say biscuit. In Australia, and I'm hoping I pronounced this correctly, a bicky. In Japan, it would actually be pronounced a cookie. So it's all the same, but you do need to start considering for your assets in your DAM and the words and the metadata you're using, what actually is it and who is it for and why is that important? So let's take up another example. Now, this is more an example of products in action. So in this one, a chip is not just a chip. A chip could be something totally different. So here we have one company, the Frito-Lay organization, with similar products in 3 locations. The first one being Walker's in the UK, salt and vinegar chips, Lay's salt and vinegar chips in North America, and then Smith's salt and vinegar chips in Australia. So they're similar, but they're different. And we need to recognize and know who the audience is, so that when you do have assets that are very similar, you're saying crisps to those who understand what the crisps are, and chips to those who know what the chips are. And that is an important part of managing your metadata. Now, this one is interesting. Now, this is something that happened back in November of this year. I saw this image presented on television on the American global broadcaster, CNN. And this was during the United States election, and they listed 5 categories of race. But they unfortunately used a very unfortunate common phrase sometimes we see in metadata and DAMs, and they refer to it as something else. Sometimes you might see this as other. It might also sometimes be seen as even worse, miscellaneous. But there are many reasons why this is often used, but they're never ever good enough to justify the unextraordinary, if not entirely ambivalent existence. And yet all they had to do was to use the correct words as provided by such an authoritative source as the United States Census to say things like, instead of something else, you could say American Indian or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander. The something else or the other or the miscellaneous, these are never appropriate. It's sloppy and it's unsystematic, and it actually lacks the quality of effort in taking the time to understand the power of words and their meaning applied to those categories and people and in our business. And more importantly, the power of those words when seen on such a medium as television or the internet, we always need to strive to do something better, to give value and to give meaning with every opportunity we have. Indeed, better metadata elements and taxonomies do exist because the content is there for all of us to use, but we need to make every effort we can to do so. The data is there to provide meaning and authority to what we say, what we write, and what we do. So my message to everyone is, let's do a better job and not have the something else's or the others or the miscellaneous, and actually put in the valuable words and terms that are in there for us all. So with metadata and language, I go to all of you on the presentation today in the audience. How is your metadata doing? We know that business needs and user needs and language changes. And with that, your metadata needs to stay relevant. So when you look at your DAM and all of your assets, and you think of your metadata, I want you to ask yourself these 4 questions. Is it out of date? Has the meaning potentially changed over time? Is it potentially damaging for cultural or other reasons? And is there potentially a new product or concept? With that careful consideration, I want you then to think of the final element of this presentation, and one that I hope everyone is participating in, and that is governance. If this was a live presentation, I would certainly do a poll at this time to see who is doing governance and what your experiences are, but governance is no longer an option because it is that important. So what is governance? Well, we know governance is a process, or a framework. It's there to ensure that program goals are being met both during your implementation of the DAM as well as in the future. So we know that taxonomy and metadata, these are all living documents that evolve alongside your business. And they need to adapt to the changes in the way that language is happening and evolving. Again, with products being added, services, your regions are expanding, your audience is changing. But you need to manage the change. And the best way to do that is an effective governance board. We know that governance is the only way to really manage and mitigate risk within your organization. And with good governance, you are able to get things like practices for good decision-making. How can you make decisions going forward in your organization? And with good governance as well, it may also establish policies and procedures and then allow for training at all levels of the organization as to what the metadata is. Now, for some organization, if the word governance is not the right word, you can certainly use a different word. You can use committee, you can use groups, whatever's the right terminology, and be respectful of the culture you have in your business, as long as you are having some type of regularized commitment by people within different sections of the organization working towards governance, then that will be your success. So who exactly is going to do this? You have the ability to start making decisions, but what are they really going to start doing, and how can it sort of look like? So do you have representation in your organization from, let's say, a metadata librarian? Again, if this was a live presentation, I would be asking people in the room, so how many people have librarians in their organization? That's one way that you have someone in the ability to make changes in the metadata and manage that going forward. How about also representatives from the different business units or product lines within your organization? They may be people as well to participate in this effort. Then there's also the users. With good governance and the ability for users in a digital asset management system to provide effective feedback on an ongoing basis, whether that's both qualitative or quantitative, they can contribute to this discussion as well. Then there's also the legal ramifications. Do you have legal representation within your organization to help provide guidance with your metadata, to allow you to know what you can do, but also more importantly, what you can't do with some of the metadata and the content? And then finally, executive. You want that accountability. You want those individuals in your organization who are able to provide you with the ability to make changes, to help finance some of these decisions that you're trying to do. Well, that will give you the support for the governance that you need going forward. So again, I ask you, for those in the audience today, do you have some of these people and do you have some of these individuals within your organization who are helping you go in to do some of the governance? Next, what is effective metadata governance? Now, obviously, I'm a big believer in good documentation. So you should have a lot of documented workflows for how you're going to be maintaining all the good things that you have in your metadata model and then the organization there. But you want to make sure that you are you adding terms? Are you removing terms? What's the frequency of these things? If there is any adoption approval, is it necessary or not? And then when you're doing some of these changes, who is going to be informed by them? This is also an opportunity to start saying, if values are changing, if controlled vocabulary terms are changing, are you effectively showing individuals, all your users, that changes are happening? If you don't communicate it, no one's going to really truly see the full effect of what your metadata is trying to do in your DAM. So always make sure to communicate those changes so that governance is being seen, that the transparency is there with your governance. So what actually does need to be reviewed? Well, if you look at it, there's a few things that can be done. You're going to look at the channels. You want to look at the field values. You want to know that values may be populated by a controlled vocabulary, even sort of artificial or AI generated keywords. So you're also going to have to say, on a granular level, is someone looking at the fields? They may need to change over time. Your channels may need to change over time. But again, these are sort of cues to sort of say to yourself and your organization, are we really managing metadata to the best of our effect? Are we making sure that we are staying up to date and relevant with what we have? Lastly, I ask you, how can you move forward? And I want to offer some practical steps for you all to start considering with your own DAM and with the metadata that you have associated with your DAM. So number one, you want to identify and future-proof evergreen content in your data. You want to define what is not evergreen so you know what needs to be reviewed more frequently. You want to future-proof your data by considering what to name fields. Do you need to drill down to specific models, or perhaps will you just need to understand the difference between various products within your organization? Number two, you want to listen to your users. You want to send out surveys. You want to hold focus groups on regular times. You want to have, remember when we, pre-pandemic, when we could have office hours, can you still have office hours? And it's a great way to get feedback, on an open door policy. You want to pay attention what the users are asking for. And perhaps they say things like the new products that we're now apparently selling they're not in the dam yet. So you want to be very relevant by having your users give you good feedback. Number three, you want to talk to your product owners and those who may be deemed as content creators in the organization. They will know exactly what's on the horizon, what's coming in the next 6, 12, 18 months. So you want to leverage this knowledge and update your metadata model to meet those user needs, because they need it and they will look in the dam to get that currency and that value. This can also inform flagging of the soon-to-be out-of-date products for your review to say, maybe this metadata isn't relevant anymore for these types of initiatives. Number four, you want to keep up to date, you want to stay aware and research. And I know this may seem somewhat overwhelming, but it's something that is manageable when you have a team and you can be working with a governance model, that there are many different ways to look outside and see what's going on in the research, to understand things on your industry knowledge so that you can help feed that information back into what you're doing with your metadata. The fifth one, you want to leverage tools such as documentation and reporting. You want to run reports on the most popular search terms. You want to also look at things like your failed search results. You want to ask for reports on SEO and social media. All these little reports are going to build up to a big understanding of what you have. So for those of you, when you're looking at your dams throughout this event, start thinking of things like, do I have effective reports? Could I get more reports? Because I can tell you, with better data from those reports, you can actually start making effective data-driven decision-making. And then lastly, you want to audit or assess your content quite regularly. I recommend quarterly or semi-annually. You want to make sure that you are putting in the effort to take a look at your data and understand and saying, is my metadata being relevant to me? Is it making the difference I want it to be? So with that, I just want to close with 2 slides to sort of inspire the audience in some ways, that for those of you who are saying, well, where do I go? Well, let's look, if you want to start thinking about a metadata strategy, here are 3 key questions that you need to be able to answer. What problems are you trying to solve with your metadata? Do you know your business goals? And do you know how metadata can help contribute to those goals? And this is things like as knowing what your products are, knowing what your services are, knowing what the goal of the dam is to be, and how the metadata can be an integral part of that. Number 2, who is going to use the metadata and for what purposes? You want to consider how much metadata you need and really truly know who is the audience. Is it for marketing? Is it for marketing and communications? Is it for marketing, communications, and creative services? Who else is part of the audience? I have unfortunately seen many dams where people forget that part and forget who they're actually building the metadata for. So take that time and say, well, who is it actually going to be this for? And then lastly, what types of metadata are going to be important for all those 2 purposes? You want to make your metadata model extensible. You want to be able to grow over time. So as the language changes, your metadata model can also grow with those changes. And my last slide for you today, some metadata best practices. Everyone's always saying, give me some good metadata best practices. So in the remaining few minutes here, I just want to run down a few of my favorite best practices for metadata. I've sort of hinted a few of them along the way, but I will share with them with you again. Number 1, again, it's not a project, it's a program. Remember, a project has a beginning and an end, it stops, but metadata is not a project. Metadata is a program, it keeps on going on. Number 2, without metadata, your dam will simply not work. You'll have a lot of great stuff in there, but no one's going to be able to find anything because it's not been identified, described. So without metadata, you kind of really don't have that much. For those of you who are interested in exploring ideas of doing artificial intelligence or machine learning initiatives within your organization, if you are going to do a program like that, you need to feed the robots really good metadata. Those robots are looking, they're hungry, they want to start learning as much as they can, but if you don't feed them good metadata, they will not be able to perform as effectively as you think they might be able to. So make sure you've got good metadata for them. Number 4, absolutely, metadata is a human endeavor. It's not just technology. You need people behind the scenes to make sure that assets are being tagged, that people know how to ingest assets, they know how to search for those things. And metadata is a human endeavor. It's going to be people that are helping make the process work and the technology shine. The 5th one, content is no longer the only supreme. it's actually the user who's actually quite worthy in this equation. So make sure you're talking to your users on a regular basis, quarterly, biannually, whatever that schedule is for you. Make sure you're reaching out to them and listening to them so you know what they're saying, what's working, what's not working, what can be changed. Number 6, metadata does provide security. It provides the ideas of compliance and rights management. Without that, mistakes might be made, but metadata will ensure that assets can be tracked and used in certain ways, not used in other ways. So just remember, metadata is actually a good level of security for your content. And then finally, I would argue that organizations that make decisions without metadata do so at their own risk. It's that important. If you are a member of the audience today and beginning to think of your new DAM strategy and the things you want to do, start with your metadata. Because again, as I say, if you don't have it, it's not going to work too well. And that's the exciting part of metadata, that it does make that much of a difference within your organization. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. And then there's a whole lot of questions here that I can start going through. So we've gone about just over 4.5 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Jeanette, I think you can just see me now, right?
Yes, John.
Awesome. So I think we've gone about, just over 4 minutes here. And there's a whole lot of good questions. So I'll just try to go through them as best I can. There's quite a few. All right. Great question from Damien. How much metadata is too much metadata? Excellent question. We are an arts organization. We have a lot of industry-specific terminology, and finding it interesting to define a new metadata structure. The question we ask is, how do we do so? Okay, excellent question. Metadata sometimes could be seen as a quality versus quantity. It's definitely the quantity part you're going for. Remember, each field you had, each field that's going to be in there and the values that are associated with it, that's going to cost money. And that's one side of the argument, but the other side of the argument is with metadata, you want to see that quality. You want people to find things. So the more you throw at it, it actually can become a little bit cumbersome. Now, for those of you on the call, I certainly understand there might be reasons why you do need to have a few extra fields, or where you do need to have certain compliance things in there. And I totally understand that, and that is great. But just remember, the more you have, the more you have to manage, and it can be a little bit cumbersome. So I'm very much about the argument of less is more, but just make sure that what you have is quality, it's refined, it's updated on a regular basis. Too much can be a little bit too much to handle. Great question, Damien. Kelly asks, what are your thoughts around crowdsourcing metadata as a means of trying to keep up with the changes? I love the idea. Great question. So I do think crowdsourcing is a great way to do it. Crowdsourcing plus governance. So it's great, let people give feedback on a regular basis, whether you have a little help button or something on your DAM that people can give you ideas. I think that's amazing. And with a good governance committee or council or team, you're able then to take all those new ideas and then put them to the council and say, you know what? Let's talk about this. I think these are some good terms we should start adding. The other ones could be effective synonyms for the DAM. And then the other ones might be, well, we're not sure yet, but maybe next quarter we'll review those ones. So I do think crowdsourcing is an excellent way to start getting feedback. And what it also does is it increases user adoption of the DAM because you're actually participating in the entire event. So great question, Kelly. That is really good. And then there's a lot of questions. Metadata as security. Culturally sensitive collections managers are understandably very suspicious of DAMs as open access systems, and CMS have been highly customized to accommodate this. DAMs struggle to mirror this without sophisticated DRM integration. So there's lots of levels to that, and with about a minute to go, I'll do my best to answer that one. Excellent question, Leanne. The materials inside your DAM should be evaluated on many different levels, and one of them will definitely be in security levels, it's sort of a two-pronged effect, right? You want effective user roles and permissions to allow people in and out of your DAM to see things. Sometimes there should be locks down on certain assets so people can't see certain things just due to sensitivity. This is not going to be released for 2 more years, so no one should be seeing these things. And with effective metadata and working with your dam to provide visual cues, whether it's a red flag or some other sort of notifications, then you're able to start identifying and say, how can I add better security for my dam? But I certainly understand with your argument here about culturally sensitive collections, that is as an entirely new level for it. And with 20 seconds left, Leanne, I would love to take this offline with you because I do think there's a little bit more there to talk about in terms of the culturally sensitive information. And DRM could be a part of it, but obviously rights management, compliance, licensing, and then cultural sensitivity as well is all part of that solution. So Leanne, maybe I can answer that a little bit more offline, but excellent question. And we are out of time. There you go. My little phone has told me we were at 30 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone.